Welcome to my cruise, trying not to be showy. I got to pay my dues to keep my jalopy. If we get the views, the shots will be flowy. We will try to amuse so it doesn't floppy. You got to see the twos, the Mando and Stormy.
Story time. As I mentioned in the last video, I was waiting for my MR2 to arrive back in Pittsburgh, and it finally did. So I want to share the history of that car with you, the first car I ever owned, and why getting it back is bittersweet. And we could talk about my plans for this car. 1984. It was 1984 we heard Prince sing When Doves Cry, and we sang along with Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. We watched a ton of blockbusters. There was Ghostbusters, there was Beverly Hills Cop, there was Indiana Jones, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, you name it, Footloose. It was a great year for movies. But also that year, I saw the commercial for the Pontiac Fiero. It was zooming around winding roads. It was a great commercial. It was really good advertising. It formed my desire for a sporty mid-engine two-seater. The Fiero was only produced for a few years because it kind of had, its engine had a habit of catching on fire. So, but the enjoyment embodied and printed itself into the happy part of my brain. I still remember that commercial. All right, fast forward almost a decade later to 1992. When I graduated from college from the University of Pittsburgh. I returned home to Merritt Island, Florida to look for a job. I landed one in Washington, D.C., close enough to Pittsburgh for me to visit my then girlfriend, now my wife, in Pittsburgh. So, I needed a car. Not just one to drive to see her, but it had to look good doing so. So, the imprint of the Fiero in the happy part of my brain drove me to want a sporty, mid-engine two-seater. Obviously a reliable one that doesn't catch on fire. So, I was very keen on the Toyota MR2. Reliable? Check. Cool? Heck yeah. Particularly the second gen MR2. What they call the baby Ferrari. With sleeker lines than the first gen version of the MR2. Being on the top end of my budget though, I could only afford the base naturally aspirated model, not the turbo. I looked around and I found one in Orlando at Toyota Land. A super white stick shift with T-tops, power steering, premium stereo. I think that's pretty much it. I found my car. Oh, side note, Toyota Land doesn't exist anymore in Orlando. Anyway, before I go on about the history of this car and how I got it back, let's see what I actually bought in 1992. All right, let's start with the naming convention. MR2 stands for midship roundabout two-seater. Others say it stands for mid-engine rear-wheel drive two-seater, but I think it really was the midship roundabout is what it really got its name from. It's the Mark II, the MkII, which refers to the second gen. SW20 is the chassis code for the second generation, so it's commonly referred to as the SW20 rather than Mark II. The Rev 1 is the first version of the second gen, produced from 1991 to 92, notorious for the snap-over steer characteristics. And it was an NA version, so that refers to the naturally aspirated model rather than the turbo model in North America market. The NA contained the 5S FE engine, I believe. It's a 2.2 liter inline four. So my 1992 MR2 is usually referred to as the, it's the SW20 MR2 NA Rev 1. Okay, let's compare the 1992 MR2 versus my son's 10-year-old 2016 Lexus IS 300 F Sport. With the inflation accounted for, the $21,000 1992 MR2 equates to about $50,000 in today's dollars. And the $43,000 2017 Lexus IS F Sport equates to about $58,000 in today's dollars. So the MR2 is slightly cheaper, but close enough for comparison. So let's compare the two. I'm gonna use my cheat sheet for this because I don't remember these stats. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's look at the interior styling. First, there was the T-top that the MR2 has. The Lexus IS, that's very 90s. I haven't seen a T-top in any car since then. The IS does not. It has, the MR2 has a pop-up halogen headlights that don't turn off automatically. Obviously, that in comparison to Lexus IS, which has integrated HID or LED headlights. The MR2 had 14-inch wheels with high-profile tires, which you don't see anymore. Now with the Lexus, it has 18-inch wheels with low-profile tires. There's huge gaps in the wheel well between the tires and the fender in the MR2, and you can see the stance is a lot different in the modern cars. The mast antenna, that's always something people notice, is that it's a retractable mast antenna, whereas on the IS300 it's a shark fin antenna like any modern new car. In terms of the interior amenities, you've got a blue interior on the MR2, very 90s. Nowadays it's gray, black, or red, as in the case of the IS. The MR2 had manual windows and locks. You don't see those often anymore. Now you got power windows and locks on the Lexus IS. I remember getting this, that was an option, but everybody said don't get the power windows and power locks because at that time they were really new and they always broke. Then the MR2 has mechanical keys compared to the electronic fob you get with the push start on modern cars. Of course, there's, to make it very 90s, you still have the cigarette lighter, and instead of a USB charger, you have a cassette player instead of Bluetooth. You got no cup holders, 0 cup holders, compared to the oversized cup holders you have in the modern cars. In terms of performance now, the MR2 has, like I mentioned, a 5S FE engine, which produced 130 horsepower and a torque of 145 pound-foot. It only weighed 2,600 pounds, so it did make 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. Now, compare that to the IS, which is a 2GR FSE engine, very similar to the engine I'm going to eventually put into the MR2. It's got 306 horsepower, 277 pounds-foot torque, but it does weigh 44% heavier. It's 37 pounds, and it makes 0 to 60 in 5.6 seconds. So if I get a similar engine into the MR2, it's going to be a beast. Particularly how light it is in comparison. Now, in terms of the transmission, the MR2 has a manual transmission with a stick shift. Changes gears in about 0.3 seconds if you're lucky. Now compared to the IS, which has an automatic transmission with paddle shifters that change the gears in milliseconds. The mechanical drive-by cable that in the MR2 now is replaced by electronic throttle control. The diagnostic port that you have available on the MR2, which is you have access to 8 to 12 sensors in the entire car that you interact by counting blinking lights and then use paper clips to reset. Whereas obviously in the modern cars, you got ODB2 port that monitors dozens or hundreds of sensors that you can interact with the computer. The MR2 was a rear-wheel drive only, whereas the IS is an all-wheel drive. So the safety-wise, only the driver's side steering wheel has an airbag on the MR2, whereas on the IS, as in all modern cars, there's going to be 10 standard airbags at least. The MR2 in 1992 did not have ABS, at least not my version. I don't think that was available at that point. It might have been. Obviously, that's kind of standard in every car nowadays. All right, what seems crazy to me is that there are significant differences in styling, amenities, technology, and safety between these two cars, right? And they're 24 years apart, so not that surprising. Yet, the Lexus IS is a 10-year-old car, and is almost indistinguishable from the new Lexus IS in terms of amenities and technical features. But in fact, it's not too surprising that because the tech in these cars, both digital and mechanical, kind of reached its peak by 2010s, right? This makes the difference between the MR2 and IS unproportionately bigger compared to the recent changes over the last 10 to 15 years. Pittsburgh Years, 1992 to 1993. It was my sole mode of transportation to work and to see my girlfriend, right? So I drove it from Pittsburgh and DC weekly, sometimes twice a week. I usually left early on Thursday evenings to go see her. Then sometimes I saw her on the weekends. The entire drive on The entire drivetrain was extremely reliable, except it did burn through tires pretty quickly. I did notice that. I went through a lot more than I expected, particularly the rear ones. The speedometer broke along the way, but that was covered under warranty. And but other than that, it was a really good car. I really loved it. The MR2 did survive the Washington DC's Great Blizzard of 1993, but it did get stuck numerous times in Pittsburgh in icy parking lots. Okay, it was 1994. I realized it wasn't safe for me to continue using the MR2 as my daily driver anymore, particularly during the winters. So sadly, I had to trade it in for a 4x4 truck that could keep me safe. At the DC dealership that I first visited to test drive a truck, they said my MR2 as a trade-in was worth less due to the speedometer having been broken. That's even though it was fixed under warranty by them, and I had records of all the oil changes to prove the mileage, but needless to say, it didn't matter. So I was going to take it to another dealership or try to sell my own. That evening, I called my parents in Florida and told them about my ordeal, and they quickly called dibs on the MR2. They're like, they really wanted it. They both loved the car, the way it looked, the way it drove and whatnot. And my dad was in need of a new car, so it was a perfect opportunity. So I drove it back to Florida, back to Merritt Island, Florida, and bought a truck in Merritt Island. And then I turned over the MR2 over to my parents. Okay, between 1994 and 2026, it was in the Sunshine State. And my dad drove it daily to work from Merritt Island to NASA while he worked at the Kennedy Space Center up to about in the 2020 time frame, or 2010 probably. He kept meticulous records of the MR2. As you can see here, every single oil change and everything else is actually documented and recorded. The MR2, obviously, being with him during that time frame, it saw what I surmised to be about 77 space shuttle launches. So I was in the parking lot for all of them. From the Columbia to the Discovery to the Atlantis and then Denver. All right, here's the part where I talk about why it's so bittersweet that I got the car back. Sadly, my dad became ill at the end of 2025, and he could no longer drive the car. But he did really want me to have the car back. So I was really happy about that, excited to take that car, to have that car back here in Pittsburgh. But to get it back to Florida, from Florida, it took a while, as I wanted to get it ready to be shipped, and other life activities were occurring. I also wanted to avoid the snowbird season due to the higher costs of having it shipped. And then the gas prices rose, and that was probably a mistake not to do it earlier. And then I finally got it transported in early June. All right, when I had the car the first time around, I never gave it a name. But having named my Tacoma truck Mando after the Star Wars character, it was only fitting that the MR2 got a name as well, and it might as well follow the same suit. So it's a super white color with blue interior. So I originally thought about naming it something around MR2, but MR2D2 or something like that, because R2D2 was white and blue, but it didn't sound cool enough, so it didn't quite sound right. And it really, that had like 5 syllables, so that was super long to say. So I was like, I had to get a better name than that. That led me to thinking about it being super white and as being like a stormtrooper. So we've named it Stormy. 2 syllables. All right. So, like I mentioned before, I think my plans on this car are going to be to replace the engine with a 2GR engine in it. That's the current plans, but there's lots to do before I get there. So, what I'm thinking is that first plan of attack is to repair what's wrong, then rejuvenate it, and then improve the driving experience, then build up the foundation, and then we swap into the 2GR. So I'm an engineer, not a mechanic, so let's see how things go. So anyway, I got my list here, so I need a reference to see I have a whole long list of things that need to be fixed and done on this car. So I have to reference my paper. So the repair, it has lots of shakes. It shakes like crazy right now. It's the motor mount, and that's the first thing I'm gonna fix. We're working on that today. Got to remove the 35-year-old stickers that are there. My sticker from college was still on there, that I had from the first time we were around. So it needs all the stickers removed. I got to inspect for rust to make sure there's no problems. The front bumper is falling off. The trunk support doesn't work, it just kind of flops. The antenna doesn't go up and down anymore. It's missing a spare tire, kind of need that. So that's the repair side, get to at least the basics so it's a functioning car. Then I want to rejuvenate it, right? So there's some of the moldings. I would like to paint the moldings white to match the rest, to make it look more modern. Fix some paint issues while I'm doing that. There's also, to improve the driving experience, there's a bunch of things I'd like to do there. From car seats to steering wheel cover, but really mainly the stereo and speakers really need to be improved. I want to put cameras in there, so front and rear cameras, and I definitely want to put fog lights in there so it looks more like the turbo version before I upgrade it up to the 2GR. So the next thing after that, I want to work on the wheels and suspension. There's some issues there I'd like to get better, being that there are 14-inch wheels on there now. The tires are really hard to get. So I want to get that upgraded, possibly then upgrade the brakes to a bigger size brakes. And then I'm ready to modernize it to go to the 2GR FE engine. Most likely we'll go to the E351 transmission, but I might stick with the current S54 transmission at first. We'll see. Haven't figured that part out yet. All right, honestly, it is bittersweet having this car again. It was the first car that I absolutely loved. But for even longer time, it was my dad's car. So as a result, it has a lot of meaning to me. So I'm really excited about getting it fixed up and really lasting a long time. I'm excited to see this car get a refresh and stay in the family as long as possible. So I'm gonna have to teach my kids how to drive a stick shift. So that's definitely a must. So follow along and see how things go with this build, and I'll talk to you guys later.